Hello, and you're listening to Eco Justice Radio. We present environmental and climate stories from a social justice frame, featuring voices not necessarily heard on mainstream media. Eco Justice Radio acknowledges that we are recording this show on the traditional territory of the Ahachman people and all of their relatives in Orange County, California. Welcome. I am Jack Eidt. On today's show, the expensive folly of carbon capture and storage. We will hear excerpts from a keynote talk from the Bioneers 2024 conference in Berkeley, California by Taylor Brobry, activist and author of Boys in Oil, Growing Up Gay in a Fractured Land. And then we will hear what is called a climate thinker, Gabrielle Walker, from her TED Talk on carbon capture. Following that, I will be interviewing energy expert and climate and environmental activist Morey Wolfson. Taylor Brobry grew up in the dynamic shortgrass prairie of western North Dakota, a youth that coincided with the brutal physical and psychic scarring of his surroundings by the coal and oil industry, a fate not made any easier by being a young gay boy enthralled by classical music, art, fishing, and poetry. From here, Taylor became a brilliant poet, writer, and dedicated activist, one of the most eloquent and profound critics of the fossil fuel industry, penning, among other works, the extraordinary memoir Boys in Oil, Growing Up Gay in Fractured Land, and the powerful essays in civil disobedience, and co-editing Fracture essays, poems, and stories on fracking in America. We also will hear from Morey Wolfson. He spent his career in energy and environmental policy. He is a former Colorado Public Utilities Commission regulator, a renewable energy laboratory employee, and governor's energy policy advisor, also Colorado. Okay, maybe we understand that we are in a global climate emergency. Data confirmed last month was the hottest May on record, putting the Earth on a 12-month streak of record-breaking temperatures. What we need is to immediately transition away from the burning of fossil fuels towards renewable power sources, but also a focus on more efficient energy use, and most important, a comprehensive plan for massive conservation and rethinking the way we do business. Yet, global corporations want to continue with their present business model focused on coal, oil, fossil gas, ethanol, and industrial agro-fueled biodiesel. So today, we talk about their plan to push this forward. First, we feature Taylor Brobry, who I heard speak at the 2024 Bioneers conference. He shares his frontline experience of growing up in North Dakota next to a coal plant and their effort to keep belching out the deadly carbon through a plan called Project Tundra that would theoretically capture and sequester the generated carbon deep underground. Next, we will hear from a climate thinker, so-called. We'll hear her give a heartfelt TED Talk testament on the extreme need to capture this carbon, as opposed to closing the fossil fuel plants altogether. We'll hear that mainstream testimony, and you can agree with it or disagree. And finally, we will hear from energy expert Morey Wolfson about the reality of the scale and cost of these plans for carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Today's show, we hope, will bend your mind a bit to keep an eye out for these well-financed and quite slick false industrial solutions. As Morey says, it's a lot easier and cheaper to buy a politician than to actually sequester carbon underground. These purveyors will go to any lengths to avoid stopping the burning of fossil fuels and keeping them in the ground, which should be the only plan for actually storing carbon. Here's Taylor Brobry from the Bioneers Conference.
Good afternoon, Bioneers. How are we doing? Well, to kick us off here, I have a question for you all. You're dealing now with two Southerners almost back to back, so I'm hoping to rile you up before you go and have your wonderful lunches. But a quick question in the audience here. How many of you, within the last 5 years, even within the scope of the pandemic, have been abroad? All right, wonderful number of hands. The more pressing question, an interesting one, how many of you have been to North Dakota? A few. Excellent. Congratulations. Well, since you're my perfect audience, then I need to educate you a little bit. North Dakota is the least visited state in the country. It is fenced in by violence. In the west, we have the frackers in Chiefs. In the south, we strip mine for lignite coal. In the east, we have the sugar beet mafia. And in the north, we have the prairie plunged with Minutemen missile silos. That is nuclear warheads. Now, to put it to you directly, since North Dakota is the testing ground of the country's worst ideas, let me just shoot it to you straight. The logical outcome of industrial capitalism is human irrelevance. And we're seeing that play out in North Dakota currently. I grew up in a county without a stoplight, in the only incorporated town of 600 people, a hubris name, it's Center, North Dakota. It is the center of nothing other than my imagination, I guess. I went to school with the same 6 girls and 16 boys until I was a sophomore, so even if you were unfortunately straight, the dating options were limited in Center. But Center should also be on your radar now. It is the world's test site for a new technology that I fear environmentalists are behind on combating currently: carbon capture and storage. In your infinite free time, I would urge you to Google and look up Project Tundra. It is being tested out at my family's home power plant, where my mother spent the entirety of her career, Minn Kota Power, which is fed coal by Bocal Noonan Incorporated Coal Company, where my grandpa Brobry worked the entirety of his career. I did not know this as a child, but I basically grew up in a company town. Everyone I knew and know was connected to coal mining. That is the clear cutting of the prairie that I grew up in. Now, one of the perks about being gay is that you know not every story is the only story. I grew up in a landscape of lies, and here is the biggest of my life. Every lake in North Dakota freezes. That's not true. The lake I grew up swimming in, Nelson Lake, never freezes. Not this year during an El Nino year, but let's go to time past when I'm growing up, when it's 20 degrees below zero. You and I could sit in Center's home lake, Nelson Lake, with a stocking cap on, and it would be bathtub warm. Steam snails into the air. Now, I could go swimming in it, but my parents wouldn't allow me to eat fish from it. Though my grandpa Hudson Bueller did, and he died 2 weeks shy of his 91st birthday, so maybe there were some preservatives in those fish he was eating. But the reason the lake never freezes, as you probably know, is because its water is used to cool the coal-fired turbine engines of the power plant. Now, with Project Tundra, which is currently being debated in North Dakota, this technology would capture carbon dioxide emissions on site, convert it to a liquid state, and then pump it 6,000 feet underground to a geologic layer we now call caprock, where it will stay forever. This is about to unleash a pipeline revolution around the country, impacting every state from Maine to California, from North Dakota to Texas. If you were a part of the 20-teens pipeline wars like I was, living in Iowa, I was the first person arrested over the Dakota Access Pipeline in Iowa. Oh, thank you. I mean, it really felt like a twisted homecoming. Be careful if I move to your state. I had left the Bakken oil boom to write my big books about the Bakken oil boom, and that first semester of grad school, it was announced one of the country's largest oil pipeline would be cutting through the county where I now lived. I grew up, though it's hard to believe it, I haven't grown vertically since 8th grade. I only grow other ways now. But I grew up playing basketball against Standing Rock, and they always won, let me tell you that. So I feel like I knew Standing Rock before the world knew Standing Rock, which is now part of a larger story we're existing in. I felt as the beneficiary of the coal industry. My family works in coal, oil, and natural gas in Wyoming, North Dakota, the Alberta tar sands. I had written op-eds. I had traveled around Iowa to say this is what Bakken crude oil does to topsoil for growing anything that we need to survive. I tried writing and co-editing an anthology to stop a pipeline because I had learned the question I needed to consider from the elders at Standing Rock: can a prayer stop a pipeline? For me, can a poem stop a pipeline? And I thought I had tried and done everything I could, and 4 of my nephews in 2016 were drinking water from the Missouri River system, which a Duke University study that year had confirmed was radioactive. For me, I needed to put my body on the line. Now, I'm not here to recommend you all go out and get arrested, though it is a hell of a good time. It's one of the most fun times I've had, but I will tell you, in Boone County, Iowa, I was treated very differently than people who were getting arrested in Standing Rock, North Dakota were. The governor had called in state troopers, and when the state trooper asked me to put my hands behind my back, and then he whispered, if you see a video of me getting arrested, there's a smirk, and my aunt asked, Taylor, what were you thinking? And I said, even I can bite my tongue. When he said, I can loosen the handcuffs, I wanted to say, no, officer, I've always wanted a big, strong man to put my arms behind my back. As you all know, you need a little humor to do the type of work that we're all in, my goodness. And so at that point, putting my body on the line, my fear, I don't have children. I'm my nephew's favorite gay uncle, of course. And so my worry was that when they are my age, that they would look at me and say, Uncle Taylor, why did you not do everything you could to stop this pipeline? So for me, even as a type 1 diabetic, which is very risky to be out of control over your body when you are in jail, I thought that's what I needed to do. I needed to test my mettle, which is one story. North Dakota, in addition to its carbon capture and storage, which I should quickly bring you up to speed what that looks like, this pipeline revolution, we cannot use old pipelines to push liquid CO2. We will develop new chrome-lined pipelines up to 48 inches in diameter. Now, the thing you need to know about liquid carbon dioxide, if it meets with water, it becomes carbonic acid. Carbonic acid is fatal to you and I, and as you all probably know, all pipelines leak. They break. Liquid carbon dioxide, if it's a windy day, can be converted to a carbonic acid cloud. We've seen this happen in Mississippi. Engines do not operate because of the displacement of oxygen from carbonic acid clouds. EMTs are not coming to you. Even if they do, the EMTs will be dead. If you do not die instantly when you breathe in a carbonic acid cloud, you will asphyxiate eventually and start foaming, and you will die. All plant life, all animal life will die. Right now, though, it's being packaged as a carbon offset. It is a reward for ethanol, biodiesel, coal mining, that now a byproduct. We used to put everything up in Lutheran Sunday school. I was taught as above, so below. We've now got it in a dark, dark way in this country. Instead of just pumping emissions into the endless garbage dump of the atmosphere, we are going to create the nation's largest sewage system that will then push liquid carbon dioxide under states, for instance, like North Dakota. And now, why does this concern us? This will traject and cross every state in this country. It will link big agriculture through biodiesel emissions to the fossil fuel industry. Liquid CO2 can replace water in the process of hydraulic fracking. And so this will keep us more dependent on the fossil fuels. We now believe that we can exist by just offsetting our emissions and pumping them underground. We can still stay on coal. North Dakota has the second highest deposit of lignite coal after Australia. We have about 800 years more of coal that we could use. We are now in the fight not only for the environment, but our own human stories. What I love about the prairie, what most people call flyover country. I don't understand why people love mountains, like they have a big weekend. I climbed a mountain. I'm trying to not curse. Later we'll all curse together. But I just want to say, cross my prairie. It's about 1,000 miles. Get back to me. You climbed 14,000 feet. I don't care. The prairie is one of the most diverse bioregions we have on the planet. My mixed grass prairie is more diverse than the Amazon rainforest. 100 acres of prairie alone supports 3,000 species of insect, just insect. Nature reveals that for it to thrive, we need diverse ecosystems. Our libraries in our democratic institutions mimic that concept best.
That was Taylor Brobry from the 2024 Bioneers Conference. Next, this is Gabrielle Walker from her TED Talk. Notice, she says, we just can't stop burning fossil fuels fast enough. Then she forgets that option completely. She also holds up another false solution, planting trees to store carbon, as the only option other than carbon capture. If you want to listen to the full thing, go on YouTube, but here is our excerpt.
So, I'm going to talk to you about carbon removals, and I'm going to start with this. This is a woolly pig. She's gorgeous, obviously. And she's also one part in a whole new set of approaches for dealing with climate change. They are all called carbon removals. And they all involve taking CO2 out of the sky and storing it somewhere safe. I'll come back to the woolly pig later. But first, why do we need carbon removals? Because I know what you're thinking. Isn't it easier to stop putting the carbon in the atmosphere in the first place? And the answer is yes, of course it is. We have to do everything we can, as fast as we can, to stop carbon getting into the sky and stop climate change getting worse. That should not be a controversial point of view at this meeting. But the problem is, we've left it too late. We can't now do it fast enough. I've been working on climate change for more than 20 years, and I've talked about it in boardrooms and classrooms and everywhere in between. And I was shocked when I found this out, but the science is utterly, utterly clear. If we're going to have a fighting chance of staying below 1.5 degrees, that safe limit, we have to have carbon removals. And it looks like we're going to need a lot. Scenarios from the Energy Transition Commission, from the International Energy Agency, from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have all shown that we're going to need billions of tons of carbon removals between now and 2050 to give us a chance of staying below 1.5 degrees. We're going to need both reductions and removals. But there's another more heartening reason why we need carbon removals. They also give us a chance, our only chance, not just to stop the problem getting worse, but to make it better. Because even 1.5 degrees isn't actually safe. We're not there yet, and we're already experiencing the fires and the floods and the droughts and the storms. With carbon removals, we can take our historical emissions out of the atmosphere. We can clean up the mess we've made, and we can give our world a chance to heal. So what do the removals look like? Well, I've been talking to a lot of people lately about carbon removals, from business executives to climate activists, and they tend to go one of two ways. They either think of trees, or they think of big futuristic machines. Nature versus tech. Green versus chrome. But the more I've dug into carbon removals, the more I've realized this is not the right way to think about them. Because the world is full of ways to store carbon. You can store it in trees, you can store it in soils, you can store it in the ocean, you can store it in buildings, you can store it in rocks, you can store it deep underground. And every one of those approaches requires some combination of natural resources and human ingenuity and technology. We're going to need both nature and technology. Now, these approaches so far, like planting trees, take a lot of land to be able to get them to scale. But there is one approach where you can actually do it in a very small amount of land but still get to scale. It's called direct air capture. And it basically involves massive electric fans blowing a lot of air over a carbon capture device. Now, okay, this does look like a big futuristic machine, I admit that. But it's still marrying technology with a natural process, geology, because when you've captured the CO2, you bury it deep underground. Now, this is an artist's impression of a plant that's being designed by Carbon Engineering in Texas. Its aim is that it will take up 1 million tons of CO2 from the atmosphere every year. And I love this bit. Where does it go? They put it deep underground in the same geological formations that the Texas soil was originally squeezed out of. I love the poetry of this. It's like reversing the valve and putting the CO2 back where it came from. And recent studies have shown that if you do that, 98% of it will still be there in 10,000 years. Now, this is still a little bit futuristic. It's still in the planning and design stages. But this carbon capture plant started operating this year. It's smaller scale, but it's already doing it. This is Climeworks and Carbfix in Iceland. They're using geothermal heat to power it, and they're putting the CO2 into the Icelandic basaltic rock. So one issue, though, with direct air capture is it takes a lot of energy to power those fans. And that energy obviously has to be green. It has to be clean. You can't use fossil fuels for it. But it also makes it much more expensive than other techniques. And it takes energy to cook wood and to grind rock. And so all of those approaches I'm talking about are currently much more expensive than planting trees. But we can do something about that. We can invest in it now, do the research and development, and get them down the cost curve to make them affordable. It worked for solar power, it worked for wind, it can work for carbon removals too. And remember, we have to get to very big scale, billions of tons of carbon removals by 2050. But we can all help by reducing our emissions as much as possible and figuring out how to remove the rest. Now, I'm not talking conventional offsets. I put a ton of CO2 in the air, and I pay you not to put your ton in the air, but my ton's still there. No, what I mean is, I put a ton of CO2 in the air, I pay someone to take a ton out of the air, either now or in the near future, and we can get to zero and beyond. What goes up must now come down. And if we all do that, if we all make that commitment, then the people trying to make removals happen will have the finance and the courage and the confidence to be able to get to the scale that we need. I don't know which of all of these approaches, in the end, are going to be the ones that we're going to have to use to get us to the scale we need. But I do know that we're going to need a whole spread of them, with nature and technology working hand in hand to take CO2 out of the sky and keep it out.
That was Gabrielle Walker, excerpted from her 2022 TED Talk. Hey listeners, quick break here. We hope that you're enjoying Eco Justice Radio. Stay connected by subscribing on all major podcast apps and visit our website, ecojusticeradio.org, to check out previous shows and guests and get connected with us on social media. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon. So go to patreon.com/ecojusticeradio and sign up and support the show. Today you are listening to The Expensive Folly of Carbon Capture and Storage. I'm your host, Jack Eidt, and our guest is energy expert, climate and environmental activist, Morey Wolfson. I'm your host, Jack Eidt, and it is my honor to welcome our guest, energy expert and climate and environmental activist, Morey Wolfson. Welcome to Eco Justice Radio.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. Morey, we met years ago working together to organize, educate, activate the population of Southern California about solving the climate crisis and stopping tar sands and fracking pipelines in the mid-2010s. You've been working in the renewable energy and environmental sector for much of your career. So why don't you just give us a rundown of where we're at with the climate? I mean, that we're working on, that we're working to help, how are carbon levels? Do we have hope here?
I'm not sure if we have hope it's not a matter in my mind of optimism or pessimism.
Yeah,
it's a matter
absolutely.
of like looking at the data and realizing where we are. And what is needed has been known for decades. And some people like yourself and your listeners are working on these solutions. But simultaneously, there are others, like in the fossil fuel industry, that are just pushing as hard as they can to take us over the edge. So we're in an existential fight for the future of this planet from a climate perspective. I spend my time promoting the solutions like energy efficiency, conservation, renewable energy, long duration energy storage, etc., and an equal amount of time fighting what I call the false solutions. The false solutions are being propagated by the oil and gas industry, basically everything from carbon capture and sequestration to hydrogen or nuclear power. These things are being promoted as so-called solutions to the crisis when they're actually distractions.
Yeah, absolutely. And also our government is in league with these fossil fuel often, I mean, not all the time, clearly, but it's a problem.
Yeah, well, it's a lot easier to capture politicians than to capture carbon. And
As
they're very successful at that. They're very adept at knowing exactly how to do that through their lobbying organizations and through the vast wealth that they have to propagate their message across the media to get people to think that actually fossil fuel industry is on the side of solving the problem when in fact it's just a massive greenwashing operation.
Absolutely. So where are we at with carbon levels? It's 350 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere is theoretically a stable climate. That's basically the name of our parent organization, SoCal350.org. That's where we got that 350. Where are we at now, Maury?
Well, 350 is the accurate number that was described to us by James Hansen, 20 years ago, that you really should not exceed that. At the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we were at 280 parts per million. For millions of years, we've been within a range that never really exceeded 350. Now we're at 426 parts per million, and we're growing at 4 parts per million per year. And of course, the connection between parts per million and the atmosphere and temperature is that we're just going to keep seeing record high temperatures around the world for decades to come unless we keep fossil fuels in the ground.
Absolutely. So we get a lot of messages through the mainstream media about that fossil fuel industry, which you referenced, and how it relates to capturing the carbon. Like you can just sort of grab it and take it and hide it from everyone. And people sort of feel, okay, the average person, well, maybe they're not even thinking about this, or some people who are think that, well, that sounds like a good solution. And someone has to have technology. I mean, if we put our technology to use, maybe we could reduce this carbon back to 350. So what's this carbon capture concept all about?
Well, Jack, you've articulated it well. This naivete of like bland assurance that technology is going to save us, this techno optimism, it doesn't apply to carbon capture because the underlying physics and underlying energetics of the topic are such that it's regardless of the wishful thinking or even magical thinking, carbon capture is basically a failure across the board from coal-fired power plants, gas-fired power plants, petrochemical plants, ethanol plants, let alone trying to pull carbon out of the atmosphere, which is just
Right.
the most absurd thing. So Unfortunately, well, what I do is I spend a lot of my time trying to work with environmental communities to get them to basically disabuse any enthusiasm that they might have for carbon capture and sequestration, because it's a refreshing understanding that they reach. Once they reach that understanding that you cannot put hope with carbon capture, that will get them to be more insistent upon getting to the root of the problem, which is bringing fossil fuels out of the ground and pumping it into the atmosphere.
We've got these names: carbon capture, carbon removal. We hear direct air capture. We hear point source capture. Now, you've referenced all these plants, of having some. I mean, we have scrubbers at the top of the smokestacks that can clean up, and that's been successful in the past of cleaning up some pollutions in our urban areas and our industrial areas. But this direct air capture, well, and removal of in the atmosphere, we're going to cover all these things in more detail. But is there any there? I mean, particularly right at the point source capture, right at the coal plant.
Right. Well, you've divided it well, Jack, because there is that point source, which is like the flue stacks from ethanol, gas, oil, coal, and then there's that direct air capture. So when you divide it between the point source and the direct air capture, starting with the point source, there's certain levels of carbon dioxide that are coming off of each of these. Like ethanol is almost a pure stream of carbon dioxide because it's a fermentation process. So if you're going to have a target for like capturing carbon dioxide, you want to go after the one that has the largest concentration of carbon dioxide. And then you go all the way to the very end, which is direct air capture, where there's hardly any CO2 in the atmosphere to capture. It's very dangerous what's up there, but it's just a small amount. So going back to point source, you've got three of them. You've got the ethanol plant, which is pretty rich in carbon dioxide, but it's interesting because there's only three ethanol plants in this country that are capturing carbon dioxide. And there's, I don't know how many ethanol plants there are, maybe 1,500. So
Now,
there's,
isn't ethanol like a great solution? We could make fuel from corn or whatever source. It's isn't it the absolute biofuel? I see there's stations in Southern California that have ethanol as their option. They've made cars
Mhm.
use it, so it's like a great alternative. We're getting off fossil fuels, right? Right, Maury?
Well, the thing about that is that this reformulated energy, gasoline, which is required in a number of states, is really a bailout for the corn industry in the Midwest. The energy return on energy investment of ethanol is extremely low. When you look at the business world, it's all about return on investment, but when you look at the energy world, it's almost like you could just dismiss that. Now, there are some nice alternatives, like, for example, like waste oil from restaurants and so forth. But that's a very minor thing, but it actually
Right.
works. But
Yeah, which is actually what I use in my diesel car, but I don't pretend that it's an option that on a grander
yeah,
scale. And that's
yeah.
the problem. And they're also weaponizing that concept of the biodiesel because there's a bunch of other agro fuels that are completely wrong. And it's the same concept as ethanol.
Well, it's an interesting thing because I apply the filters of price and scale. So, like for example, where you putting in the cooking oil into your vehicle, you acknowledge that it's not going to approach scale, but it's still worth doing because of it makes some minor difference, and it's good for you. It won't obviously work at scale. Same
Right.
thing with carbon capture. Carbon capture, they might have these highly publicized things. Every single day I get something that says, hey, new breakthrough in carbon capture. And then you look in vain in these articles for the dollars or the scale. And it's pretty hard to find because if these articles that are promoting carbon capture and sequestration were to admit to the price and the scale challenge in a very honest way, they realize they have no story. I mean, it isn't a real story. But going back to the point source, ethanol would be an appropriate place because there's a lot of ethanol that's coming out of the flue stacks, a lot of carbon dioxide that's coming out of the flue stacks. Next one up is coal. Coal has about 12% concentration, then natural gas plants 6 or 8%. Now, they've tried coal for decades and they've wasted billions, low billions of dollars, federal dollars, pursuing this, just handing them out to utilities so that they could greenwash that they're trying to do something about climate change. And they failed. Basically, there's detailed articles or reports done by the Government Accounting Office that show the amount of federal money that has been wasted and thrown away on coal. Now, natural gas is another one because this is unbelievable, Jack. There's not a single natural gas plant in the world that is using carbon capture. Not one. And there's tens of thousands of natural gas plants in the world. Not one is employing carbon capture. So that might tell your listeners something about how viable this technology is. And then if you shift over to the full range of insanity, it's the poster child for carbon capture, which is direct air capture. And you could see TED Talk after TED Talk and article after article about it. And these guys are living in a complete fantasy world. And you look a little behind the curtain, who's behind all of this? Oh, well, it's almost always billionaires, the likes of a Jeff Bezos or
Yeah,
Musk,
that was my
you know,
next question.
yeah, and they are doing it in order to polish up their image.
Yep.
They know they're in trouble with their image is at stake, so they can hire a public relations firm, and they're out there saying, we're on the side. Please don't demonize us. We're working hard as we speak, trying to capture that carbon so we can solve it. So it's an interesting thing, but I will say, Jack, that ultimately I know. I mean, you could trust me, right? But I know this is a house of cards.
Yeah.
This whole thing is going to fail. And everybody that was involved in the enterprise during 2023, 2024, 25, when the house of cards falls in 2026, because it just doesn't work and it's viewed by taxpayers for common sense as a complete waste of money, all the people that were involved with that, they will feel no obligation to apologize to anybody because it was good money that they were getting during that period of time, and they gave it the good old college try. They were just being positive.
But hold it, you said 2026 it's going to fail. I mean, do you really think, think about how this country and this economy is able to prop up things that have been failing. I don't think in a couple of years we're going to see an actual accounting in a real way because there's been already so much invested, so much political capital, as well as, look at corporations like Microsoft, Stripe, United Airlines, some of the biggest polluters in the world who don't have good options for reducing their emissions. They're investing millions in carbon offsets as well as capture. So they're paying others who say they're doing the good things. You mentioned billionaires like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. So all this money, how and okay, the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a lot of good things in that, but
Yes.
there's also a lot of these wastes of time and money and effort and greenwashing. So how do we 2026 is that because Trump's going to cancel all these things if he gets elected?
Oh, okay. I like your question, and underlying my statement about 2026 is my own form of magical thinking. We're going to have a trifecta of Democrats in the Senate, the House, and the White House who basically realized that they were parties to all of this back in 2022 and in 2020 with the Inflation Reduction Act. And then they'll explain themselves that it was just political horse trading to be able to get Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema and those types of people to sign on to the Inflation Reduction Act. So it's not going to fall. It's what they call political economy. That the politics can make something economic, like nuclear power or like ethanol or like carbon capture. And when at root it is not economic, but politics can make it so. So in my statement about the House of Cards is maybe wishful thinking that there will be a reckoning among the Democrats who might feel like they now have the time to be able to say, we don't need to do horse trading with these Republicans. Well, of course, Trump is going to strip away all the good things in the Inflation Reduction Act that relate to energy efficiency and renewable energy, but he will keep intact this carbon capture because that's a big leaf cover for the people that are funding him, the CEOs that are promising him $1 billion.
Very much so. Good point. Thank you for making that point. A lot of people think, Trump's going to come in and, get straighten things out. No, he's not. He's just part of that same team. One of them makes better press releases, but I mean, there are differences. That's true. But anyways, we have just about a minute and a half here before the break. I want to talk about some of these plants. There's a carbon capture plant in Iceland. It's direct air capture called Mammoth because, they're taking mammoth amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere. 35,000 tons of carbon removed per year. Is that progress, Morey? And we'll get into this more, so just give us the quick answer.
Well, it's a funny thing because you could read article after article after article about Iceland and about Mammoth, and some of it is good reporting. But Jack, I have yet to find an article that tells me who is the money behind Mammoth. Who is it? Is it a free enterprise type operation? Is it a competitive situation? No, this is all greenwashing on an extreme scale. And unfortunately, because we're living in the world of the big lie around the big lie, which we all know what that is, then that gives license to accept all kinds of smaller lies. And the smaller lies is coming out with carbon capture. And we could talk about Mammoth when we come back after the break.
Yeah, there's a lot of big lies out there, but this is rife with them. We'll be back in a minute with Morey Wolfson talking about fake solutions. Hey listeners, quick break here. We hope that you're enjoying Eco Justice Radio. Stay connected by subscribing on all major podcast apps and visit our website, ecojusticeradio.org, to check out previous shows and guests and get connected with us on social media. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon. So go to Patreon/EcoJusticeRadio and sign up and support the show. Today you are listening to The Expensive Folly of Carbon Capture and Storage. I'm your host, Jack Eidt, and our guest is energy expert, climate and environmental activist, Morey Wolfson. Okay, Morey, we sort of cut you off there. Did you finish all your thoughts about Mammoth in Iceland?
Well, the thing that I think your listeners will enjoy understanding, which I think many of them may not know this, is that the average car, the internal combustion engine car, it releases 5 tons of carbon dioxide a year. Now think about 5 tons a year coming out of a car.
Wow.
And let's say that you were to put a price tag that somehow there's a machine on the back of that exhaust pipe that is capturing carbon. I mean, this is magical. Of course, it's not going to happen, but $100 a ton. That would be $500 a year just to capture the carbon. That's not going to happen. Okay. Now, 5 tons, then you could think about, well, okay, like a Mammoth plant in Iceland is producing X thousand tons a year. How does that equate to cars? You find that when you do the math, it's almost as close to zero as one can express. There's like 3 or 4 billion cars on the planet, and this Mammoth Iceland plant, which is getting all this press, it's on the front page of Time magazine and everything. I mean, I think that we're at that place where, because of the depth of the climate crisis and how much angst that does cause, from a psychological perspective, a mass psychology, we're in a place where people are just searching for anything so that they could continue with their lifestyles and their consumption and all of that as much as possible. And so carbon capture fits really neatly into that psychological need to say there's going to be a technological answer to this. But the fact is there's not. And it has to do, there's a term in the electric power industry called parasitic power. Parasitic power is essentially if you bolt a carbon capture machine onto the electric power plant, then that carbon capture machine is going to take energy to operate. It's going to get the power from the power plant. And that's called parasitic power. Well, it's typically around 25% of the power from the electric power plant is dedicated parasitic power to operate the carbon capture machine.
25%.
25%. That
So
means
I was thinking it would be like, oh, 2%, yeah, we'll plug those things in. Did you plug in the things? Maybe we could get some batteries for them, solar powered carbon capture. No, I guess not.
yeah, and so okay, so it's 25%. That's the underlying reason why carbon capture is uneconomic. Oh, well,
Right,
why don't we use renewable energy for these things? Well, what a
right.
waste of renewable energy. Renewable energy is a very valuable thing, and we need a lot more of that. But to be dedicating it to a loser like that, no, it's not going to happen. So parasitic power is the term that people who are considering carbon capture, that's one of the first things they should Google. Google the word parasitic power and then combine that with carbon capture, you find out, 25%. So let's say that you own a coal plant in Wyoming and you want to keep that coal enterprise going. You could pass a law, which they did in Wyoming, that says you're going to require carbon capture to be operating in your power plant. Well, that requires them to have to build more capacity because they're losing 25% just to. It's like a dog chasing its tail.
Right.
It makes this is it's nonsensical. And in Wyoming, for example, the utilities there have done their analysis, which reported to the Public Utilities Commission as to what the implications are of going forward with the law in Wyoming of having to do carbon capture. It's $25 a month for the typical residential customer. But they're
Wow.
saying, hey, it's worth it because it's going to keep those coal jobs going. So this kind of comes back down to jobs and economy and certain states like West Virginia, Wyoming, Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma, these fossil fuel rich states are like promoting this in part because it's going to require more fossil fuel development, which actually converts into more dumping into the atmosphere. So the whole thing is like at root a very sketchy enterprise.
Yeah. There's the term carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So let's talk about what they mean by utilization. How do oil companies propose to utilize all this captured CO2?
Well, so when you drill a well for oil, then you get your primary oil out, and a lot of it's still locked in the geology. So that they go into what they call secondary recovery, where they will flood it or use salt water or something to try to like get more oil out. Then they get into what they call tertiary recovery, enhanced oil recovery, because there's still a lot of oil that's left in there. So they use carbon dioxide. They're getting kind of desperate but they want that oil. So they've been using enhanced oil recovery using carbon dioxide to a very limited extent in the Permian
So
Basin in Texas.
the carbon dioxide. So when you send down the evil carbon dioxide, it is how does that make it easier to extract? What's the process there? That
Um, I'm forgetting the term for it, but it basically softens up the carbon dioxide,
yeah,
softens up the oil, and so you could actually get more oil out of that deposit. And they've been using that for a while, for almost 50 years, but to a very limited extent.
right.
And now they want to build these big direct air capture machines in Texas and the Permian Basin, and then they would just send that carbon dioxide down into the formations to get even more oil out. So Occidental Oil, for example, is at the forefront of this, and they're funded essentially by Berkshire Hathaway. Warren Buffett is like a big investor in this, and essentially, when you look at the mathematics of it, the amount of energy which they're using to pull the carbon out of the atmosphere, and then the amount of carbon that they eventually put up into the air, it nets out negative. But that's okay with them because they're selling more and more gas. They're using more and more gas. And in the meantime, they're fooling the American public. and they're paying off the politicians. So there's this enhanced oil recovery. There's some carbon dioxide today that is coming from natural formations in either Colorado, New Mexico, or down in Mississippi. There's natural geologic formations of carbon dioxide. They tap into those, they put those into pipelines, and then they send them to the oil companies for enhanced oil recovery. Now, there's only 5,000 miles of CO2 pipelines in this country compared to, like, I don't know, 200,000 miles of oil and gas pipelines.
Right.
So it gives you an idea of the scale of this enterprise has been very, very small.
But what about the safety of those pipelines? Because
Well,
we've
there
got
you
this
go.
gas, that we're trying to keep from the atmosphere. We see with oil pipelines, it's very corrosive. I just saw last week there was another explosion. Really, every week there's another pipeline exploding somewhere, even though they say they have great safety records. But that's with oil that is very corrosive. How about carbon dioxide?
Carbon dioxide needs an entirely different type of pipe that can withstand it because it has to be at much higher pressures. It's at about 1,200 psi, pounds per square inch, and it needs a sort of a stainless steel type of a pipe because the corrosion from carbon dioxide is like an order of magnitude more corrosive than oil and gas. And so
Interesting.
they're very expensive. And the problem with the safety is when a carbon dioxide pipeline explodes, it's not like an oil and gas, which is like a mess and it causes some carbon to go into the atmosphere. This is like an asphyxiant, and some of your listeners probably have learned about what happened in Satartia, Mississippi, a few years ago, where there were like 45 people that were rushed to a hospital and because they were asphyxiated. This is in a very poor African American town in Mississippi. Even the emergency responders, their ambulances could not get to the site of the problem because there was no oxygen in the air to keep the spark plugs running. So it's a whole order of magnitude worse because your livestock's going to die, and if you've got your family or kids out in the field, they're going to die. They will be asphyxiated.
What exactly happened? How did it explode?
There was a flood type of situation that caused the pipeline to fall into a little bit of a ditch, and it broke and it unzipped, and there are really weak or almost non-existent safeguards around carbon dioxide pipelines. Now, of course, in Midwest, they've got these multi-billion-dollar plans to develop these carbon dioxide pipelines and run them from ethanol plants to sequestration in the Dakotas and running through Iowa, multi-billion-dollar operations. And they are getting unbelievable resistance in the state capitals, in the legislatures, and in the regulatory bodies. And Illinois just last week basically said we don't want carbon dioxide pipelines in our state because they are too dangerous.
And that's probably news to everyone. I mean, I don't think this is on people's conceptual radar.
Yes.
But it's good that it is on people's radar, as you're saying. There's people who are fighting this. We need to be aware of this. And then, okay, let's talk about where they're going to store this carbon. They call it sequestration. So it sounds like there's some little place where they can just put this stuff. Let's hide it. No one's going to notice. We've got the pipelines. We'll send it over. We put it into.
Yeah.
Can we just pump this gas underground? Will it stay underground? Is this a technology that we can have faith in?
Well, okay, so this is a good one because this has to do with the wells, and that all goes to who has authority over the wells. So there are 6 different classes of wells in this country. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. One is for oil and gas, and there's like a couple 100,000 wells that are under the classification for safety and everything for oil and gas. Now, imagine this, Jack. Class 6 wells is what is required only for sequestration of carbon dioxide. There are right now 3 carbon dioxide wells in the United States of America. Okay. They are located at Arthur Daniels Midland's plants in Peoria, Illinois, where they're right there on site. So they're not even using a carbon dioxide pipeline to get to the sequestration.
But
The
hold it, Arthur Daniels Midland, is that ethanol? I mean,
Yes.
what? Okay.
And there's only three of them, and it's not a booming business. This was done because they were able to get some federal money years ago to do this as a bit of a test. And so this sequestration idea of like, okay, you've got to get it from the source, like a power plant and into a location to sequester it. They talk about these saline formations, or they have to have certain formations that can actually hold the carbon dioxide for any period of time. And so this is one of these things where it's it's got to be at least 95% federal money, our tax dollars, going to the from Congress to the Department of Energy to spread across the country this false hope. Now, maybe 5% of it is private industry, and they're doing it for public relations images. Like you mentioned, Microsoft and Stripe and United Airlines, they're doing that so that they could put up ads on the Super Bowl commercials that they're doing something about the climate crisis. So this sequestration is not an industry that has any history of carbon dioxide except for these three limited little things at Arthur Daniel Midland's plants. So there are certain locations where they say the geology can accept carbon dioxide, but the permitting for this is done through the Environmental Protection Agency. And I must say that the EPA has very strict requirements on safety of the well bores. And some states are attempting to take primacy so that they can be the regulatory body rather than the Environmental Protection Agency. But that too is like one of the biggest problems with carbon capture, utilization, and storage sequestration is that you've got to pipe it there. It's very expensive, and there's a lot of issues such as who owns the pore space and all of that. So there's a lot of issues with it.
Yeah. So we need to reduce carbon in the atmosphere about 80 parts per million just to have a stable climate. So we need to take this stuff out. We need to put it somewhere. Okay, we don't really have a good place to put it, but let's just say we did. So 1 part per million. So we need 80 of those. How much does that weigh?
Oh, perfect. Jack, this is, as you know, from our interactions over the years, I've been like laser focused on where you're going with this right now. In fact, I would suggest that if any of your listeners are wanting to take any note, this is what they take, actual physical note, where they get the pencil out and the paper at their desk, and they go with me through this very simple math. 1 part per million, remember there's 426 of them up there. 1 part per million weighs 8 billion tons. Got that? 8 billion tons. Well, now that doesn't mean anything. It sounds like a lot of weight, but let's put that into something tangible. We have to multiply that times a dollar sign to know what it's going to cost to be able to remove that 8 billion tons. So I'm going to use the most aspirational number you can imagine. It's an order of a magnitude lower than it actually is out there. I'm going to use $100. Why do I use $100? Just to keep the math really simple. Multiply 8 billion times $100. Everybody's writing this down now. That's $800 billion for 1 part per million. So we've moved the needle from 426 to 425, and we've ignored the fact that it's growing at 4 parts per million. So you could see just like how desperate and insane this thing is. But if you read 1,000 articles about carbon capture, I dare say you're not going to find 2 articles that just took you through the math. And it's not like, well, don't trust him, he doesn't know. Well, just pick up your phone, ask Siri, how much does 1 part per million weigh? And it tells you straight up, it weighs 8 billion tons. Well, then you multiply it times $100, $800 billion. Hey, that's about the Defense Department.
So I think our listeners got it that this is folly. I'm sure you could go on quite a bit because there's more to unpack with these things. But what I want to talk about is what we really should be doing instead of these things. Just real quick, just to give, because we need to, okay, this is a lot of negative stuff that we're giving people, and people's heads are starting to explode. Morey, you've worked in renewable energy for a long time in Colorado, as well as your advocacy out here, as well as probably a bunch of other places. What do we really need to be focusing on to solve this climate crisis?
Well, I appreciate that. First of all, I think it's a mass psychology issue, because when people say we need to remove the legacy carbon in the atmosphere from 426 down to 350, they should think about that statement. But we need to do this. You may need to do this, but it's not going to happen. That's the problem. See, this is cognitive dissonance. It's like that is not going to happen. As long as people are holding on to this idea that we're going to need to get it from 426 down to 350, that might be something you would sure wish would happen. But when you look at the thermodynamics of it, the physics of it, let alone the money and the politics of it, it's not going to happen. So, ergo, what do we need to do? What do we really need to do? We need to stop it at 425 and let nature do its job, because nature will slowly but surely do its job. Okay, in terms of natural sequestration, but that's going to take centuries. Okay, so I'm not here to dispense optimism around taking the carbon dioxide from the current levels down to 350. I
Sure.
think, but I am optimistic about what the answers are. And in California, it's pretty obvious to see that they're making tremendous progress, at least on the utility scale, with renewable energy and transmission. So it comes down to like renewable energy, large scale with long duration energy storage and transmission. People can look at the California Independent System Operator thing on their phone every day, and they'll say, whoa, look at that. 68% yesterday in California was coming from renewable energy. There's been a 50% increase in battery storage in California the past year. California is sort of leading the way. It's also doing some strange things, at the PUC relative to net metering. But
Yeah.
it's essentially, it's a pretty simple calculus. Renewable energy, pedal to the metal on both rooftop solar as well as utility scale. Pedal to the metal on both scales. They should not be fighting each other, thinking one's better than the other. Got to do both. And there's a lot more room for energy efficiency and conservation. So it's basically those things that are needed. And I spend a lot of my time, almost as much time, on the what I call the super grid, which is to make an interstate highway system or a transcontinental railroad system in this country for electrons. So we can really bolster the renewable energy through a super grid. It's a high voltage direct current transmission system across the country that would cost less than 1 part per million of carbon capture. It's the same $800 billion to have a nationwide super grid. So I give many talks on the super grid, and I spend my time with the top subject matter experts on the high voltage direct current system. So it's a combination of transmission and renewable energy and efficiency.
Yeah, and I like that you always are sure to add that conservation and efficiency should really lead this, because we really can't just replace the way this profligate way of consumption. We have to accept that we're going to have to make some sacrifices, and that's not happening, unfortunately, and in so many different ways what we're seeing. So how do you see this conservation and efficiency playing out? Because there's so much we could do, and a lot of entities are doing it, but it's clearly not enough.
Well, there's certain limits on how that can be done through the regulatory process, like at the Public Utilities Commission. to encourage demand side management, load control and management, and so forth. And they've done quite a lot in California over the years. California has been a leader on that, but the other side is the behavioral. It's the behavioral response to the climate crisis, where people start to behave differently, meaning they lead less profligate lives. They start to move into more of simplicity, and their aspirations around bucket lists and all of that stuff have to start to diminish, so that people can get along and walk, uh, take a bike, take public transit, and those sorts of things. I think that there's when you look at the profligate use of energy in the United States, and you compare it to almost anywhere in the world, we're using twice as much per capita in the United States than they are in Europe or in Japan. Let alone if we get into topics like China, India, or Africa. So we are, and then within the United States, we've got these super polluters, like big corporations and wealthy people and their lifestyles with their private jets and so forth. It's just really off the scale when you consider there are some people that if they were to be, like put into more of an average use, it would really cut into things. But things seem to be going the other way. Everybody likes those private jets. Not everybody. A lot of people aspire to that kind of a lifestyle. I think we need to have an aspiration towards like moving in the other direction.
Yeah, and that's with this show, that's what we're trying to focus on, the people who are really doing amazing work. You're one of them. Another question, should we all just be planting a tree? What's your view on mass tree planting?
I like trees for shade. That's primarily why I like them, and for habitat for birds and for nature, it needs trees. But the thought of planting trees in order to get more carbon capture, that's a fool's errand. I mean, essentially, like in Pasadena, I was a big advocate for tree planting, so that when people are walking along, it's 90 degrees outside, they want to have some shade.
Sure,
I
definitely.
like that. The idea of going out and having plantations of trees. Trees have this nasty habit of dying, and when they die, they do what? They emit the carbon dioxide right smack back into the atmosphere. So
And what about when they burn in wildfires and different things like that? Then we're really in
exactly.
trouble.
Yeah. So, there this was one of the favored efforts that the Republicans had about 5 years ago. They were talking about a trillion tree initiative. Of course, they didn't plant one of those trillion, but they were promoting it as the way to do that. And so I don't think there's hardly anybody that's out there actually talking seriously about addressing the carbon crisis, the climate crisis, by tree planting. Yeah,
Yeah,
it
we
also
love
takes
we
it takes a lot of water to be able to, trees take a lot of water. And so when you're in California, for example, and you want to have trees in your urban environment, know that it's going to come at a cost of water. But I'll sacrifice a lot of water to get a lot of shade.
well, Maury, really appreciate you taking time out of your day to share with us. You're doing such great work out there. We really appreciate you coming on Eco Justice Radio today.
Thanks, Jack. I really appreciate the invitation. It's great to see you.
Can you tell us how people can follow your work? I know you have some things out on YouTube. You do a lot of presentations. Is there a way people can follow what you're doing?
Yeah, I don't have that much of a presence on YouTube or media, so all I would suggest is that I'm happy to share my information if people would like to reach out to me by just simply emailing me. I respond very quickly to emails, so it's Morey Wolfson at AOL.com. And
Great,
I could spell Morey, MoreyWolfson at AOL.com.
great. Well, thank you, Maury, and keep Keep doing the great work and setting the economy and government straight here, because we need some fast efforts to solve this. Well, as you noted, we're not going to solve the problem because we were just way down the line, but there's a lot that can be done. And so I appreciate
Thanks,
you
Jack.
educating people.
Thanks a lot. Take good care.
Thank you to Taylor Brobry for his Bioneers keynote and our guest, Morey Wolfson. And thank you to our listeners for joining us. This has been The Expensive Folly of Carbon Capture and Storage. For an extended version of this interview, become a member of our Patreon or visit our website at ecojusticeradio.org. Please connect with us on social media at Ecojustice Radio, SoCal350, and Wilder Utopia. If you like what you've heard and you want others to be informed, subscribe, share the episodes, and help us continue our efforts by joining our Patreon or making a tax-deductible donation to the show. Project of SoCal 350. The show can be found on KPFK, KPFT, all major podcast apps, and at ecojusticeradio.org. Executive producer and host, myself, Jack Eidt. Co-host Jessica Aldridge, co-host Carrie Kim, and engineer and original music by the one and only Blake Quake Beats. And until next time, remember, the power is yours.